So, you've probably heard about it. In early 2024, this massive trove of documents related to Jeffrey Epstein finally dropped. And boom, it was everywhere. Headlines, big names, wild conspiracy theories. But honestly, in all that chaos, what did we actually find out? Let's get into it. Okay, first things first, let's just wrap our heads around the sheer size of this thing. We're talking about 3.5 million pages of information. I mean, to put that in perspective, if you stacked all those pages up, they'd literally be taller than the Statue of Liberty. This isn't just some simple list, you know? It's a total labyrinth of emails, FBI interviews, flight logs, private letters, the whole shebang. And man, did it set off a storm online. You probably remember it, right? If you were on social media at all, your feed was just flooded. Celebrity names popping up everywhere, crazy allegations, and so much conflicting info. It got really hard to tell what was real and what was just noise. Which brings us to the big question, the whole reason we're doing this. After you filter out all that noise, what do these files really tell us? What's actually new here? What did we already know, and what's still a complete mystery? Now, before we dive any deeper, we have to get one thing straight, and this is absolutely crucial. Just because someone's name is in these files does not mean they're guilty of a crime. We're talking hundreds of people, associates, witnesses, victims. So let's be super clear, this is not some kind of client list, and we've got to be really careful not to jump to conclusions. Okay, with that big disclaimer out of the way, let's get to what everyone's been wondering about. Who are the powerful people named in these files? And while it's not a straightforward list like many hope for, it definitely pulls back the curtain on some really embarrassing and frankly disturbing stuff from people in Epstein's orbit. All right, take anti-aging influencer Peter Adia, for example. His name pops up almost 2,000 times. In one email, he makes this just crude comment about a woman's anatomy, calling it low carb. In another message, after Epstein sends him a photo of a woman, Adia writes, and I'm quoting here, "The biggest problem with becoming friends with you, the life you lead is so outrageous, and yet I can't tell a soul." To his credit, Adia has since apologized, calling it all embarrassing and indefensible, and he even stepped down from a corporate role over it. Then you've got emails from Steve Tisch, the co-owner of the New York Giants, and these are pretty shocking. In one exchange about a woman, Tisch actually asks Epstein if she's a pro or civilian. I mean, wow. In another, Epstein tells Tisch that a woman was, quote, a little freaked by the age difference but go slow. Tisch later put out a statement saying he deeply regrets ever being associated with Epstein. The files also get into some really disturbing territory with Bill Gates. There's this one email which Epstein seems to have drafted for one of Gates's advisors, and it claims Gates needed medication for an STD after having sex with Russian girls. Now, it's really important to say a spokesperson for Bill Gates has come out and said these claims are absolutely absurd and completely false. Okay, and then there's Donald Trump. The files include these FBI logs of tips that came in just weeks before the 2020 election, and they're making some pretty sensational claims against him. But, and this is a huge but, the Department of Justice itself has said these tips are unfounded and false and that they could never be corroborated. So you have to take that with a massive grain of salt. This next one is a really good example of how these files, add some real weight to stories we've already heard. We all know about Prince Andrew's connection to Epstein, but what's new here is sworn testimony from a second victim, Johanna Sjoberg. She stated, under oath, that Prince Andrew groped her. This is huge because it corroborates what other accusers have said and adds a whole new, really significant layer to the case against him. So we've talked about some of the big names, but beyond just who was involved, the files give us this really chilling look at how the whole trafficking ring actually operated, the mechanics of it all. And it was a system, a cold, calculated, four-step process. It started with scouting. Recruiters, like Ghislaine Maxwell or the French modeling agent Jean-Luc Brunel, would find vulnerable girls, a lot of times from poor communities. Then came the false promises. They'd lure them in with these dreams of modeling careers or education or just a better life. And once they had the girls' passports, that was it. They were trapped, flown out to Epstein's properties, and then exploited. And what's just so cruel about it is how it worked like a twisted pyramid scheme. Once a victim was trapped, she would often be forced to recruit other, even younger girls, sometimes from her own hometown. It just kept this horrific cycle of abuse going, and it guaranteed a constant supply of new victims for Epstein and his network.
All right, you can't really talk about Epstein without getting into the conspiracy theories, right? And while these files don't just hand us all the answers on a silver platter, they definitely add some new, intriguing wrinkles to the biggest questions that have been floating around for years.
Let's start with his death. Was it suicide or murder? Well, the files don't solve the mystery, but they sure do add fuel to the fire for both sides. On one hand, we learn he was talking to prosecutors about maybe cooperating right before he died, which, you have to admit, sounds pretty suspicious. But on the other hand, we now know he made a 20-minute final phone call to his girlfriend, which sounds a lot like someone saying their goodbyes. So yeah, this debate is far from settled. And then there's the whole Epstein was a spy theory. The documents are just riddled with weird clues. I mean, Vladimir Putin's name comes up almost 1,000 times. The city of Moscow, nearly 10,000 times. We even have an FBI source claiming that a former Israeli Prime Minister, Ehud Barak, actually trained Epstein as a spy. Now look, these are just clues, not proof, but they for sure add to that thick cloud of mystery that always surrounded the guy.
But it's so easy to get caught up in all the conspiracies and the famous names. We can't forget what this is really all about. The most important story here. It's a story of incredible human suffering. This is about the victims. Their voices are the ones we truly need to hear. And maybe the most gut-wrenching thing in all 3.5 million pages is a diary entry from a young victim. In just raw, teenage language, she writes about being pregnant with Epstein's child, giving birth, and then having the baby taken away from her. It's a heartbreaking first-hand account of the real human cost of these crimes. And this is so important to understand. For a lot of the survivors, this big document dump didn't feel like justice at all. In fact, a group of victims put out this really powerful statement. They said that because of sloppy redactions, their identities were exposed all over again, and it felt like a total betrayal. It just re-traumatized them, all while many of the men who abused them are still hiding in the shadows, protected. So, what's the big takeaway here? Well, the Epstein files were never going to be just a simple client list. What they really show us is something much, much more disturbing. They reveal this tangled web of elite power, of people looking the other way, of protection, a whole system that allowed these horrible crimes to go on completely unchecked for decades. And that just leaves us with one last kind of haunting question. This whole story has exposed a network of people who seemed completely untouchable. So if the systems that are supposed to bring justice fail, and the powerful stay protected, what does accountability even look like? It really makes you wonder.